we are pressing very hard to help support the work that Tony Lodge has done for us. Tony is an old friend of the CPS. His most recent pamphlet is, of course, Rail's Second Chance, which we published to great acclaim in April this year. Tony, would you like to kick things off?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Tim. It's actually interesting that the title of this meeting is 20 years since rail privatisation, but actually it's also a year since the franchise award collapse back in October 2012 with regards to the West Coast Main Line, so it's rather a good anniversary to be discussing these issues. Back in October last year, Tim and I were having lunch in Westminster, and Tim asked me, what can we do in light of this rail business, this rail scandal, as some people were calling it. And I also thought to myself, well, we're 20 years this year, of the Railways Act 1993, so it's a very good opportunity to look at rail and the privatisation process. And what I'll do to start is I'll read a quote from the 1992 White Paper, which was published by John Major's government, and the Secretary of State at the time was John McGregor. Our objective is to improve the quality of railway services by creating many new opportunities for private sector involvement. This will mean more competition, greater efficiency, and a wider choice of services more closely tailored to what customers want, which I think we'd all agree is an excellent ambition. Now, a lot of that hasn't been achieved. We've had a number of serious issues en route. We had the issue of rail track, we have the Hatfield crash, we have Potter's Bar, we had Ladbroke Grove, so there's been a lot of even tragedy there, I say. There's been an issue with the issue of maintenance, rail track becoming Network Rail, but I firmly believe we are, pardon the pun, on the right track. Now it just so happens I have family up in Yorkshire, and I regularly travel to see them and I have the option on the East Coast Main Line of not necessarily using the franchise, East Coast, formerly National Express, formerly GNER. I have an opportunity to use Grand Central or Hull trains. Now, this has triggered, and at the time triggered, ideas in my head, which I discussed with Tim, which was how do we maintain and keep a franchise healthy, but how do we also introduce more competition from the private sector? Now, we're seeing it on the East Coast Main Line. Now, I will just quickly read through, because I'm going to let the other speakers go into more detail, but the research we carried out in Rail's Second Chance, which is this pamphlet we published in April, revealed some really interesting statistics, which I'll just quickly cover. Because as we all know, we are seeing booming rail travel. No one expected this kind of rail boom use since 1993. It's gone from 750 million passenger use to 1.5 billion, and we're expecting it to double more. This is on a rail network which has not been as busy since 1929, and it's almost half the size. We found that where rail competition between the franchise and open access operators, where they both competed at stations, we found that 42%, there was an increase in passenger journeys of 42% at the stations which enjoyed rail competition. Revenue increased by 57% where competition occurs, compared with 48%. Average fares only increased by 11% at those stations with competition, compared to 17% at those stations without. We found that the companies competing with the franchise were having record passenger satisfaction figures, and perhaps more importantly, which is probably music to the minister's ears, is that the premium which the franchise holder East Coast can pay to government, is paying to government, has been going up year on year. It's actually encouraging and making the franchise holder operate better, more leaner, more efficiently. Now, the final thing I will just say, because I just want to give an overview of our research and where we're coming from at the Centre for Policy Studies, is that we now have a situation which we're really keen to encourage, which is that there's no threat to the franchise. The franchise is actually doing better. On a political point, the Labour Party's plan to nationalise East Coast is completely absurd, because actually that company would be doing so much better in private hands. Its revenue is actually quite flat. But what are the challenges going forward? We need to better manage capacity. We can encourage more open access with a better fee-paying structure, but encourage more private entrepreneurship on the railways. Those companies will and can serve routes a franchise won't and doesn't want to serve, and Richard will go on to that. We can acknowledge a test case success, if you like, on the East Coast Main Line. If you went to King's Cross Station now and you wanted to travel to Doncaster, you could go with East Coast, you could go with Hull Trains, or you could go with Grand Central, find the cheapest fare. That is what we mean by competition. But I think it's also a route to where we may well be in 10 or 15 years, which is a post-franchise railway landscape, where perhaps people are bidding for capacity, bidding for bidding for certain paths. That's a post-franchise world, which we're not really, we're not close to that yet. We will have new franchises issued in due course. But what we are trying to do is, 20 years since the Conservative Party introduced privatisation, and 20 years since we had the nerve, and dare I even say the courage to do it, very controversial privatisation, as we all recall. The party had a relatively small majority. We had a slightly reinvigorated Labour Party under John Smith. So we carried that through. There were some serious bumps along the road, but I think there is now a chance where we need to boast about the success. We need to boast about the increase in rail use, the initiatives of internet ticketing, the initiatives of more routes being served, the initiatives of companies like Richards and the investment Virgin have made, for example, all really important. But I really think there's more we can say as a party and start claiming a bit of credit. But what I would do, if you want more on all this from me, have a look at the pamphlet. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And buy the pamphlet, it's half price today. So, our next speaker is Arthur Leathley. Delighted he's here. For the next few days, but the next few days only, he is the communications director for Virgin Trains, where he's spent the last 9 years, heading the company's media, political and internal communications. But I think I'm right to say that as of Monday, he will be the Director of Communications at the Department of Energy and Climate Change. Arthur, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, out of the frying pan, some people say, into the fire, but there's going to be some challenges ahead, and there have been some real challenges within the railways. But as Tony's already said, I think we've got to look at the many successes that we've had in the industry over the last 15 years, and I think the title talking about Rail's second chance perhaps suggests failure, although I know from speaking to Tony that's not his intention. I think because of the success, actually we've got an opportunity almost as a second coming for the rail industry. I think we've had a first step towards privatisation, but it hasn't been a full privatisation by any means. For many reasons, partly the reasons that Tony has just mentioned, there have been some major hiccups on the way, not least rail track. But we haven't moved, I don't think, as far as the government of 1997 really intended, before 1997, really intended to bring out the full competition on the railways that could really generate a lot more income, I think, for government as well as the private sector, but also in the end the key thing is to improve services. And we've seen the improvements so far in terms of more customers, higher satisfaction than ever before. I say ever before, actually British Rail didn't measure customer satisfaction in anything like the detail, indeed did they measure it at all. So we've given ourselves those benchmarks, and I think as an industry we've performed very well. Safety, which often gets overlooked, we have an incredibly safe network. And I do touch wood as I say this, and I'm always told don't mention the safety word, but we should mention the safety word. A phenomenal record in this country, second I think only to Luxembourg in terms of the safety record of this country. That didn't come by accident, and it didn't come cheaply, and I don't think anyone would say reduce the amount of money that's spent on safety. It did come at a cost, but I think we all accept that needed to happen. And unless we need to dispel this myth, I think that this is a heavily subsidised railway that is usually put around, certainly by the Labour Party and by the unions. It is not. We are now paying a net premium as the train operators to government. Certainly in Virgin's case, we pay well over £100 million a year to government. That, I think, requires a different set of management in terms of government management, which is, I wouldn't say just lighter touch, I think it's giving opportunity to the private sector. Say, can you generate more income? Can you do more than that 100 million? And really put the pressure on the private sector and say, we want you to deliver, but we will give you the freedom to deliver. And I think that was very much the case when we started in the railways, and Richard Branson had this vision that he could double the number of customers on West Coast. And everybody said, no, it won't happen. It's never happened before. It's certainly in the previous 30, 40 years, it's not going to happen. It has happened. We now carry 32 million customers against 14 million when we took over. So that has developed. But I think there are chances now to really look at the next 20 years of privatisation, what could be done around fares, to change the fare structure, simplify it. There's no question the industry needs to do more on that, and the government is rightly putting us under pressure to do that. I think we could invest a lot more in trains, but again, we need to be given the freedom to do that on some occasions. Let's try things a bit more. I think so often we're having to wait until something's absolutely proven before we dare bring in a new service, a late night service, or try a new destination. I do understand with railways it's complicated in terms of timetabling, but perhaps we could just try things for a year, see if things work a bit more. I think if we just wait and say it's got to be an absolute certainty, then a lot of opportunities will get missed. And kind of that really comes back to Tony's point. Undoubtedly, open access operators, I think, will force that movement in terms of new opportunities. I would just take Tony up on one point, though. I mean, he talks about the increase in patronage at those stations where there's competition. It's not a surprise that the open access operators go for the stations where there's likely to be a good revenue. So there will inevitably be a pent-up demand at those stations. I think we need proper competition. We don't want cherry picking. I think that's a slight risk. Open access operators, and we saw it on West Coast, they can pick a route that they deem to be profitable or viable, and come in and only operate that route. As a franchise operator, we have to do far more than that. We serve many destinations that, frankly, wouldn't necessarily be viable. We've taken subsidy in the past to help us through that early period, and now we're prepared. We also can make money on other routes that covers up, so we don't need to be subsidised anymore. But I think this cherry picking is a bit dangerous because we saw with one particular operator on our route, they left town with 2 days' notice, 48 hours' notice, and said, sorry, anyone who's bought a ticket, you'll have to find another way of travelling. That's unbelievable, really. That wouldn't happen it wouldn't happen in the bus industry, and certainly a franchisee clearly wouldn't withdraw from a service 48 hours before doing so. So I think that needs to just be managed. Open access sounds attractive, but I think it's got to be done on the right terms. It's got to be genuine competition where they pay the same access costs as a franchisee. But having said that, I think there's great opportunities. I'm sad to be leaving the rail industry because it's been a fantastic 9 years that I've enjoyed with Virgin, and I think there are far more opportunities ahead. So I'll be sad to miss those opportunities, but I'm looking forward to other opportunities elsewhere. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next speaker is one of the heroes of rail competition. Richard McClean has been Managing Director of Grand Central Railways for nearly 2 years, and is also Managing Director of DB Regional Tyne and Wear. Richard, thank you.
Thank you. It's two highly contrasting operations, but I'll be focusing on Grand Central. Clearly we're in Manchester, so I'd imagine a lot of you have got a lot of familiarity with Arthur's Virgin West Coast operation, and a fantastically transformed setup it is since I remember it in British Rail's days. But Grand Central is a small niche operator focused on providing a service to communities that were previously not well served by rail. We are not allowed to run at peak times, and we're not allowed to serve large markets with an existing established rail service. We do what we do using spare capacity on the network and spare rolling stock that would otherwise be idle. Clearly, with that background, our business is highly shaped by the regulatory framework which has been set by the Office for Rail Regulation and indeed the Department for Transport. But we're very happy to be who we are, and we're very happy to be doing what we do. We've developed our product and our markets so that we can be commercially viable, and we've done that through managing our cost base and through growing, and fundamentally growing, the number of passengers who choose to travel with us instead of the alternatives. And the alternatives are not just rail. There's the alternative of not spending money on travel. You can go by coach, but we do compete in some places with existing rail services. How are we growing the number of passengers that travel with us? We do it in the same way as Virgin do. We get our product right. We have a simple but effective onboard service. We provide reasonably priced walk-up fares that people can buy on the day of travel. And we've introduced a highly competitive range of advanced purchase tickets. But we've also focused very strongly on community engagement. We are a local business serving local communities on the routes where we operate. And we've engaged that local community very particularly in our operation through station ambassadors who help us in their own spare time with customer service activity. We also focus very heavily on staff engagement. Our staff understand that we are a commercial operation. If we are not viable, we will stop operating. Staff are recruited locally, and they know their passengers, and they know the routes very well. But clearly, with the scale of our operation and the markets we serve, we have to work hard to survive. Our markets are marginal. Nobody else wanted to serve these markets or run services to them. It is hard work finding rolling stock that's compatible with the network. And it's even harder to prove, particularly to Network Rail, that capacity exists for the operation of additional services. It's hard to prove that we could create new rail revenue and not just transfer it from existing services, as Arthur suggested. But the presence of our service at stations has seemed to act as a catalyst that triggers progressive improvement with significant direct investments from us as an operator, but also from associated stakeholders. We've seen ourselves and First Group investing in new car park capacity at Northallerton as patronage there has grown steadily. We've managed to leverage a partner organisation called Chesterley Track to reopen as a private venture a ticket office at Eaglescliff Station. We've invested in passenger information systems on stations in the West Riding, and we're a partner in the complete rebuilding of Wakefield Kirkgate Station, transforming what was described by a previous rail minister as the worst medium-sized railway station in the country into something that that community can be proud of again. The local communities on the routes we serve tell us that our services are key to the recovery of their environment, with local businesses and hard-working people being able to access developing markets, particularly in the southeast, cost-effectively. Passengers tell us that they like our service too, with the national passenger surveys producing results consistently above 90% year on year. Although we're small and we're doing something different to the other operators, we are sometimes portrayed as the spawn of the devil, leeching revenue away from the DFT and existing operators. However, I think that's unlikely given the facts. We are small compared to the franchise operators. We have 1 million passenger journeys a year compared to Virgin West Coast 32 million. We run 16 trains a day. Our markets are separate. The locations that form that produce the majority of our revenue are stations that other operators and the DFT and their franchise specifications have actively chosen not to serve. And at the few locations where we do overlap, as Tony said, the total rate of growth and the growth for other operators has been faster than at the stations that have a monopoly operation. And these are particularly the smaller markets. Stations like Northallerton a station that had a very sporadic East Coast service until the arrival of Grand Central's operation, which now has a regular service with more extra trains arriving there from East Coast than Grand Central run in a day. The market has literally taken off with a 42% growth in the total usage of the station, much to the pleasure of North Yorkshire County Council, whose offices are just across the road. Franchising policy has been progressively to create larger and larger franchises, which have effectively become regional monopolies, progressively reducing the level of on-rail competition that did exist even under British Rail. But open access operators in their current guise are hardly likely to take over the world. But we are ambitious, and there are other destinations which have been neglected and taken off the intercity rail map, places like Blackpool, Rochdale and Barrow. We, as an operator, we're willing to take the risk to give those markets a chance, prove that the capacity exists, and are confident that we can do something special for those communities.
Thank you very much indeed. Our final speaker is Simon Burns, who is the Minister of State for Transport, Rail and Aviation. Competition works. Can we see more?
Well, thank you very much indeed for that. I was at a meeting yesterday lunchtime where the person chairing the meeting said what an exciting and interesting time it was for rail in this country at the moment. And it made me think back to 20 years ago as the legislation was going through Parliament to privatise the rail service. And I remembered some of the things that were being said at the time about the impact that this legislation would have on the railways. And everything that I remember that was said then has not come to pass in the subsequent 20 years, because the example and the practice of what's happened has totally disproved the merchants of doom and gloom who criticised the whole concept, let alone the principle, of privatisation. What we have seen in the last 20 years is something quite remarkable, and something that if you'd said it would happen 20 years ago, you'd have been written off as crazy or totally ill-informed. For example, the declining number of people using our railways not only reversed, but radically reversed over the last 20 years, as was said earlier in the comments. 750 million passenger journeys a year has doubled to just over 1.5 billion. More and more people are using our railways. What, to be fair, the last government did, and this government has embraced with a vengeance, it has stopped the practice that previous governments of all political persuasions adopted under British Rail, which was when the government was in trouble economically and needed to save money or needed more money for other priorities, they raided the rail budget. So the railways had a gross lack of investment, so that rolling stock, track, all worn out, deteriorated, and we have reversed that to the point where in the next control period, which is 2014 to 19, £37.5 billion will be spent by Network Rail and the government in renewing, replacing, repairing and adding to the existing network. You look at 1997 to 2010, just to pick one time period at the top of my head, there was 10 extra miles of electrification on the rail network. Since 2010, over the last 3 years and the next 3 years, 850 extra miles of electrification will be introduced to this country. You've seen an ongoing programme of upgrading the track, repairing, replacing where needed. You see a situation where the outdated and antiquated electrification system is being replaced in addition to the new electrification that's being done. You see bottlenecks being alleviated by the insertion of loops or extra track. You see the investment, £800 million in Reading Station, a complete rebuild to reduce and remove the bottleneck that will liberate the services to South Wales and the southwest of England. The renovation and improvements that have been carried out to Nottingham Station. And that is being replicated throughout the country as we play catch-up to ensure that we have a modern railway system fit for purpose to meet not only the increased demand that we have had, but also the anticipated future increase in demand, because it will continue, as all the statistics show. The trouble we have is that the railways are too successful in one way, and they are running out of capacity. The West Coast Main Line, for example, is anticipated it will be full to capacity by 2024. We want to get more freight off our congested roads onto the rail. There's been a 60% increase since privatisation, but we want to do more. And the way to do that is to remove the bottlenecks, to add loops and other track configurations where it will release extra capacity, but also we believe strongly that we also need high-speed 2, because high-speed 2 will release the capacity on the spine from north to south in parallel, in effect, to the West Coast Main Line, that will then release the capacity on the West Coast Main Line, both for the benefit of passengers along the whole of the route and also for more freight. But given that everything has improved in a very positive way since privatisation, that doesn't mean to say that everything is ideal. There are still a number of important challenges that have got to be met. Capacity is the key one, and we believe that we will do that with the remedial action we're taking, with the building of high-speed 2, and with the constant levels of record investment through Network Rail and the government. Secondly, we have got to ensure that the reliability, the punctuality and the quality of the service continues to improve. We have seen with the franchise system that the train operators, for a variety of reasons, and certainly in some areas it's because of competition, in other areas because it is bringing the stimulus of private enterprise into the running of the service, that they are far more responsive to the needs of customers than British Rail ever was. And for those people who I hear from time to time harking back to wanting to return to the halcyon days of British Rail, they're either too young to have ever experienced British Rail, or they have a very short memory, because British Rail was by no stretch of the imagination utopia for rail travel. In fact, it was the exact opposite. The franchise system, which again has been referred to, I mean, sadly, there was the fiasco of the West Coast Main Line competition last year. It was unforgivable. Patrick McClean came out immediately that the whole drama unfolded and said this was unacceptable and apologised. But we took remedial action as a result of that. We set up the Richard Brown inquiry and the Leathley inquiry, both to see what went wrong and why, and where the franchising process needed to be changed, strengthened and improved to ensure that hopefully never again will we have such a situation. We've adopted and accepted Richard Brown's recommendations for improving and strengthening and enhancing the franchising process, but what it shows is that it is widely accepted by the vast majority of people that franchising is actually the right way forward. And for those people who are claiming now that the East Coast Main Line should remain under door, they just do not understand A, the function and the purpose of door, or how the rail system and franchising works. DOOR was set up in legislation as a service of last resort when there was an emergency and a problem with a franchise. They were there to be ready to pick up a franchise so that whoever was Secretary of State at the time there might be a problem would be able to continue to fulfil their statutory rights to provide a continuous service. They are not a franchising company that is there long term to run a railway. They are a measure of last resort to fit a short-term emergency to ensure the continual running of a railway. That is the function of DOOR in legislation. That is what it does. With the East Coast Main Line, it has, as just a fact, operated on the East Coast Main Line for longer than I suspect was ever originally anticipated when Andrew Adonis and Sadiq Khan put the East Coast Main Line into, in effect, government control. But that is why we are determined to have it back in the private sector by February or in February 2015. And so we have got to maintain the pressure to ensure that the franchise system is fit for purpose and carries on to be able to, during the next, certainly the next 6-7 years, as the new revised franchising timetable goes through its processes, provides companies for each franchise that is capable and able to fulfil the functions of any franchise agreement. There is a challenge, though, on the rail operators as well to continue to ensure improved punctuality, improved reliability, responding more to the needs of their customers, because the customers who are using the railways now are far more sophisticated and demanding in what they expect for the money that they are spending to use the railways. And you have got to have companies running those railways that have the imagination, the vigorousness, and the sensitivities to respond to raising the quality of service and meeting the demands of their passengers. And you see it with a range of initiatives that a number of companies have instigated into their services over the last decade or so. I also believe that you need to look at the fare structure. You need more flexibility, the introduction of smart ticketing and all of that. And that is why my colleagues at the department, Norman Baker and the Secretary of State, have been carrying out a fares review. And I know that, or I discovered yesterday, that some of it has been speculated by ministers at respective party conferences over the last few weeks, but the actual fares review will be published during the course of this autumn, so that one can have a debate on what is being proposed to move forward again to help passengers. I think we also, and this is a self-interest given the constituency I represent, we have to look again at how we improve the services for commuters. Because in many ways they are a captive audience, and I hear sometimes the Department of Transport from civil servants and from others that people should rejig their working hours and working days. Well, in theory, that's probably sensible advice, but many of my constituents work in the city, and they don't have the luxury to be able to do that, because there are very fixed times, because of when markets open, of when they've got to be at work, and they don't have the luxury of being able to go to work later in the morning, where they may benefit from a cheaper pricing policy. And finally, we've had a number of comments about the important role of open access. I think open access has a very valid and an important role to play, both in bringing a stimulus or a further stimulus to competition and providing a niche in the market. But as was also said, there is also a danger of cherry picking, and we have to balance the two sides of the argument and judge open access, to my mind, on an individual basis to make sure that it actually achieves its potential without also causing damage to the overall well-running of a service because of the propensity for cherry picking. And I think that is a balance that one can look at and one can move forward, and with care one can actually continue with a process that has been an invaluable spur to improving services in certain parts of the country. And so to those people who claimed 20 years ago that this would be the end of the world as we know it, to those people who seem to hark back now to a halcyon era that never existed, I would just say that the experience for the last 20 years has confounded the critics. It has exceeded the expectations of those who were fully supportive of introducing a form of competition and bringing the private sector into what in many ways is a collaborative arrangement with government. We have a justifiably proud record at the moment of massive investment in our railways, which will continue certainly through control period 5, and I have no doubt through control period 6, which will start in 2020-24. And so we should take pride in privatisation, but we cannot stand still, pat ourselves on the back, say everything is right, and carry on with that complacency, because there are still large areas for improvement moving forward to make the railways more responsive to the needs of customers and increasing above all the capacity so that we can meet the challenges of ever increasing demand. Thank you.
Son, thank you very much. The panellists have very kindly agreed to take questions from the board. So.
Thank you. Simon Moffat, Conservative Transport Group. Tony's a great advocate for open access operators, and we've seen from children who are franchisee, if they can see a return investment, they're quite willing to make infrastructure investment. And Richard mentioned Blackpool. I wondered if he saw a opportunity for an incoming open access operator to pay for perhaps electrification from Preston to Blackpool in return for some exclusivity or guaranteed period of operation.
Well, I'll let Richard answer that in a second, Simon, but what I do, it's an interesting point, because you may or may not know, First Hull Trains are proposing electrification between Hull and the junction near Selby, which they would seek to fund, because as they, not going into too much railway minutiae, that is not, again, as Simon was saying, that bit isn't electrified, and they would look to do it so they could run faster trains.
I think the key thing, and you mentioned Children. Children has a long-term franchise and therefore a long-term access agreement, which allows it to make investments and get a return on the investments it funds. And the same is true for any business. If you have the available funds and you have the opportunity to recover a return, then you will make the investment. And indeed, for Grand Central, we've looked at some infrastructure schemes. We've made investments in car parks already. We're looking to make investments in core infrastructure in our next access period. Whether electrification to Blackpool has got a strong enough business case on a marginal service, I don't know.
But you're not.
The principle is definitely there. The principle that if you have a long enough term to make a return on the investments you make, and you have the available funds, then that's what businesses do.
Graham Naughty, Conservative Transport Group. Before I ask my question, can I please congratulate Simon and his team on the wonderful news of 800 or so miles of electrification that we've heard of recently. Well done. Thank you very much, sir. We really appreciate it, especially in Derby on the Midland Main Line.
Thank you.
My question is this. About 10 years ago, I went to a Rail Future meeting in which a senior executive of the East Coast franchise was giving a talk. I asked her if she ever thought of running through services by the East Coast, Peterborough, down to Cambridge and so on. Her answer was that they may have looked into it, but the situation was they could not guarantee to run an hourly service throughout the day, so that wasn't in their business model to progress that. My question is, if we thought of a rule of thumb where the franchise operator concentrated on all the markets where there is a good market for an hourly service throughout the day, and the open access operators concentrated on the markets for which there was 2 or 3 trains a day, like Hull to London, would that be a good rule of thumb to move forward from? And in moving forward, could that get far more open access operations in the UK?
Can I have a go at that? It sounds attractive, but the great challenge we really have is capacity, and it's capacity at the southern end, and that is an issue that just isn't going to go away, hence the need, in our view and many other people's view, the government's view, for HS2, because we simply haven't got the capacity at the London end. I mean, Virgin in the past has developed services for, if you take something like Chester, where we had 5 services a day, and we created that, we made that into an hourly service, and a very successful one. So I think franchise operators can do that themselves. It comes back to what I was saying earlier. Let's have this opportunity for trying things out. Whether that's open access or whether it's the franchisee, I leave to government to decide. I would still come back to the point, it must be true competition and not in any way an unbalanced competition. But yeah, the opportunities are there. There really are new destinations to be served. But of course, everybody wants to be in London by 9:30 in the morning. That's the great problem we have. If, and Simon said earlier, Mr. said, it would really be an opportunity if people could spread their journey times, but wherever you're coming from, everyone wants those morning meetings, and they all want to be going home at 5 o'clock or something like that. And out of Euston, same King's Cross and any other terminal, it's really, really tough, and I haven't got a solution to that. So that's where the problem is. There's bags of opportunities north of, for us, perhaps north of Milton Keynes and upwards. We'd love to develop services there, but in all honesty, the market isn't as strong as the London market yet. But we should push that. We shouldn't give up, because I think we're setting up from December new opportunities from the Midlands through to Scotland. We think there's going to be some really exciting new travel patterns, both for business and for leisure. So there are real opportunities away from London as well.
I think in some respects you described the current model, which creates niche operations like Grand Centrals or Hulls. As Arthur said, capacity is one of the core constraints, but the other constraint is actually the viability of the markets that are left as the Heineken routes that other railways don't reach. How viable they are to support the costs of operation. I think the key thing that's common to all of that, though, is that what spurs the generation and the promotion of new services is the private sector operator drive their business, and what really kick-starts it is proper competition between operators on the rail network, not dominated by some sort of 5-year tractor plan for rail that's deciding which markets get trains and which ones don't and get frozen out. If you can create a competitive environment for businesses and a competitive environment for markets on rail, then things start to open up with the type of experimental operation that Arthur talked about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The lady.
I just got a question here. I'm John Kelly. I'm from Northern Ireland. Was a railway for my county was closed for 6 months for refurnishing, because it's a historical line from Derry to Coleraine, and Michael Palin and Michael Patel were 2 reporters and journalists said the railway line should be kept as a tradition to our city of culture, London, Derry. And now we've got a lovely new line, all up to date, all upgraded, now we're going to put in meeting points and run by train more frequently. And I believe if more and more people travelling by train because of the road congestion and congestion charges and stuff like that, and pollution and stuff like that, I believe there will be more increase in rail travel.
Thank you. Sorry, the lady there.
Thank you. Kirsty Buchanan, the Sunday Express. I know I'm going to sound like a complete creep because Arthur's here. I travel quite frequently on Intercity, and Virgin has always given me exemplary customer service. First Great Western, apologies if anyone from First Great Western is here, are absolutely hopeless, and there's a huge disparity in levels of customer service between franchises. And as franchises are getting longer, there doesn't seem to be any ability within the franchise system at the moment to affect change of really bad levels of customer service. I don't think I'm alone in finding this disparity between something like Virgin and First Great Western, or Fast Great Western, as I think they're commonly known. And just another question, if I might aim it at Simon. Smart ticketing, excellent idea. I know what you're saying about commuters being a captive market, but for those of us that have some flexibility, smart ticketing clearly seems like a great idea. Any movement on pilot schemes? Because this has been in the pipeline for 3 odd years, 4 odd years.
I mean, if I can answer the second part of the question first. You raised an important point about smart ticketing. As I said in my comments, this was something that was fully considered as part of the fares review by Norman Baker and Patrick McClean. I am far too lowly in the food chain to breach confidences by leaking what the fares policy will be. As much as I'd love to. But I mean, we will be publishing the fares review in the autumn, and you'll then have an opportunity to see what work has been done and what may or may not be being recommended, including whether or not there will be pilot schemes in certain parts of the country, which I think we find there probably will do in the southeast. On the question of the franchises, I mean, firstly, the franchises are not going to get longer. I mean, the proposal 2010, 2011 was to do franchising for, I think it was 15 years, rather than 7+3 or whatever. And one of the recommendations from Richard Brown following the West Coast Main Line was that it was not sensible to have such long franchise periods, and we have accepted that. But what we do want to see is usually what you get in the past with the franchise process is, as companies are bidding for a franchise, they will come up with ideas and things that they want to do, will do if they get the franchise. And when they get the franchise, they will then fulfill what they've put in their bid, but they see that as the end of the line until the next franchise process, 7 years, 8 years, whatever, down the line. What we want to see is greater flexibility within the train operators, so they don't just see it as, coming up with bright ideas for the bidding process and then doing them, but actually throughout the whole process, making changes, bringing in innovative ideas, improvements, and that's up to a point changing a mindset. And we are very keen to start that process so they don't feel that, their innovation and imagination stops the day they start picking up the franchise and delivering the service.
And for those that are less keen on
Sorry?
For those that are less keen on warming to that challenge, is there any sort of penalties that could be built into?
Well, I'm a slightly more optimistic person, that I think that all train operators, because they do have the challenge that their franchise will end at some point, and many of them will want to rebid. And I also think they want to maximise people using their railways. Now, I mean, if you take first on the Great Western Line, I mean, they face a problem which Virgin faced for part of its current or its previous franchise, which was, Virgin had disruptions on the West Coast Main Line because of the £9 billion that was being spent in investing on it. First, have had that problem because of all the major work that's been going on at Reading Station, and for the next 6 years or so, they're going to have problems, or any operator's going to have problems on the Great Western Line, because we are electrifying it all the way down to Cardiff and beyond to Swansea and Bridgend, and that inevitably will be disruptive to whoever is running the line. I mean, the Great Western Line is going to be getting a new rolling stock very soon, which will also help. But as long as you're having all this investment and playing catch up on the past, you will have some disruption to some services at some point, because you cannot do that work. And you know, however grim it might be at the time, and you know, if you haven't got trains running on a Sunday because they're upgrading the track or whatever, that is annoying. But the longer term gains far outweigh the disruption over a shorter term. Though as a passenger, it may not seem shorter term if you're directly affected.
I think the key thing is, how hard does the operator have to fight for its passengers and for its market? And West Coast, although the franchise has a monopoly of the intercity service on that route, it has no monopoly over travel between the cities on the west coast of the country. There's a very viable and highly active air service from all of the destinations along that route, and you've got to provide good service and good value, otherwise they'll go another way.
Absolutely, and we think at Virgin that the quality of service is key. It applies to the whole brand, and we're very keen to see that the franchising process reflects that and rewards past quality. We can all promise the earth, but actually what have you achieved in the past should count towards your score. And fair to Richard Brown's review, he has focused on that, and I think government has taken that on board, that judging that previous performance through national independent passenger surveys, that is going to be a key element of future bids, and so it should be. And I would take the point absolutely that we've got to keep moving on during the franchise. It's rather slightly laughable that at Virgin we're still, strictly speaking, supposed to hit some satisfaction targets that were set back in 1997 as part of the franchise then of, I think, 72% customer satisfaction. We're at 92%. Now, frankly, we should have been pushed all the way, and we should be pushed even now. 92 isn't quite good enough. When are you going to get to 93, 94? That drive hasn't come in the past from government. I think things are changing now, and from the review by Richard Brown, we would welcome that. It is important, you're quite right, and thank you for the compliment. I'm sure you weren't being creepy. Thank you.
Tom Bauer from Simon Burns. You said that the investment since privatisation has brought great benefits, but if you take the 9 billion on West Coast Line, the original estimate was 800 million. And the Brown review showed that the cost of British Railways compared to European railways is between 2 and 4 times more expensive. So the cost has been phenomenal. And my second question is, why should the public have great confidence in the new franchising system when, as I understand, not one of the people responsible for the West Coast disaster has been reprimanded, let alone dismissed?
Well, on the second part, you'd have to speak to the permanent secretary, because we have kept it very much at arm's length, because that is an internal disciplinary matter for the permanent secretary. I think I'm almost certain in saying that your statement isn't 100% factually correct. But the other thing is, compare the cost with Europe. It varies, but part of it is some European countries use taxpayers' money to subsidise their railways and subsidise their rail fares, and we, by and large, don't. I mean, the only obvious major subsidy that we give is where we keep open social lines for social needs, which, if you were looking at it in a clinically cold economic light, you would close down. But we believe, as local communities do, that there should be a service, and it's a combination of central government but also sometimes local authorities or local transport committees will subsidise lines that they believe have an important social role to play. If you're talking about the investment, I'll be quite frank with you. The figures that you quote on the West Coast Main Line, I'm not familiar with. That doesn't say I'm doubting them. I just don't know. Maybe I should know, but I will plead in my mitigation that it was before my time. What I do know is that the largest engineering project in Europe at the moment, which is Crossrail, is being built on time and on budget. And with proper financial controls in, you can control the budgets to ensure that you deliver that, because Crossrail is an example of that.
The gentleman
On the future, in the title, I think, the HS2 is a massive part of the future, which I personally support. I'm from Tunbridge and Morley, by the way. I should identify myself as Chris Nash. And it's probably a little bit of a shame that the maglev technology didn't get sort of a fair run at that, but the lead times are huge and long, and by the time you came into power, that was probably already baked, so that's fine. But do you have any comments on where you see maglev? I'm talking about, far out now, a very strategic industry in this, so we still have to be thinking about it, I guess, where you see a step change in the technology, and Glasgow to Edinburgh in 15 minutes, and how that reduces the need for extra runways, whereas the two airports basically become two hubs of the same airport. All that sort of thinking, is that in the department's job brief? Do they spend any time thinking about it?
I mean, we are determined, the decision has been taken that HS2 will be a classic high-speed railway, similar in principle to Japan, France, Germany, Spain. That is the way forward, and what we are concerned about and driven by at the moment is actually getting that built, moving ahead, getting that built, rather than looking at the alternative that the Chinese have adopted, and that the Japanese are currently still testing in Japan. And we are determined, because I think you were at the meeting yesterday?
I was, yes.
We are determined that because we have time on our side, because of the length of time it takes in this country to build any major new project.
It's a bad thing.
It's a bad thing, to my mind. There's got to be checks and balances, but it just seems that Britain takes far too long. I was talking to a Turkish MP yesterday afternoon, and they've got almost 1,500 miles of high-speed train, and they built 800 miles of it in the last 4 years. My eyes watered.
Very impressive.
But we do have, and we certainly are in contact with what other people are doing to complement what we're doing on research. For example, the important issue of reducing noise nuisance from the trains themselves. And there is a lot of work going on in Japan on that. And I mean, Japan is different to High Speed 1, and I think I'm right in saying different from the French TGV, because they have a skirt all the way around the bottom of the trains, even going over the bogies, and they have the panels either side of the pantographs, which reduces noise. They are doing a hell of a lot more work on their next generation of high-speed trains to seek to reduce the noise even more. And we still have time on our sides to be able to benefit from whatever technologies they develop that will do that. And similarly, there are other areas of research going on at the moment that I'm almost certain will benefit from when the time comes to place the orders for the initial rolling stock for the first phase of HS2.
Thank you. The gentleman at the back, please.
I'm Chris Loder, I'm from West Dorset, but I'm also a railway operator by profession. I have a question for the Minister. Minister, you said earlier that the West Coast Main Line was full to capacity, or would be full to capacity in 2024. Recently, though, we have seen track access applications declined for the West Coast Main Line already. So, do you not think that we're full to capacity already on the West Coast Main Line?
Straightforward answer is no, only because that's what the statistics tell me and my officials tell me and people in the rail industry tell me.
Well, from my opinion, the fact that we are already declining track access applications on the West Coast Main Line indicates to me that we are full to capacity already, and I think it would further support our argument for HS2 if we really recognise that right now that we cannot run any more trains into Euston in the morning peak, and I think that would really support our argument for HS2 if the department really grasped that and shouted about it quite quickly.
Well, okay. I mean, we certainly shout about the capacity problems. We're also aware that in the peak hours there are 5,000 passengers an hour standing on trains coming into Euston. We also know, which we're not terribly happy about, that Virgin is unable to start a direct service from Blackpool because of capacity problems. So yes, at certain times there are serious capacity problems on the West Coast Main Line. But I am assured that overall capacity is at 98% and that it will be at 100% by 2024. And those are the only statistics and advice that I am constantly given when we ask about it, and no one has been able to prove to me that that is wrong overall.
I'd like to catch up with your officials about that, to be honest with you, because I think there's a really strong argument, and we see it not just on the West Coast Main Line, but all around London, that we can get further trains into key London terminals. Some of the suburban stations, our passengers are having to wait for 2 or sometimes 3 trains to get in, and I really think it would be a good opportunity.
I mean, I come from a commuting city, and I certainly understand that. I'm told because of the investment we're putting into Bow Junction that there will be some relief to some of the capacity problems in my part of the world, and also if we have loops. But I'll do a deal with you. You write me a letter telling me why you think it's 100% now. I'll show it to the civil servants, and then they can justify to you whether you're right or they're right.
Can I just come in on that one point, which is an interesting one, further to what the chap just said there from Dorset, is, of course, we have a hell of a lot of money being spent at the moment at Stafford, at Norton Bridge. And Network Rail have explained that this will open up new high-speed paths by 2016. Now, I will just push our line on this, which is I do hope that we can see a bit of open access on the West Coast in order to serve some locations which presently aren't well served. And hopefully those new paths which have been created can be where that occurs.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just on that, Blackpool is a good example, and the Shrewsbury services, and the Minister mentioned this. It is that difficulty. How are we going to squeeze capacity at the time that everyone wants to travel? I would say we can push Network Rail a lot harder. I think. I don't know if anyone's here from Network Rail. I'm sure there are. Because I think there's a little bit of complacency that we build in a bit of contingency for poor performance, and that restricts some of the capacity. So I think there is some work that can be done around that. Once the improvement in performance comes, and Tony just gives an example there, then there may be opportunities to bring in those new services. But that's going to be very tight, certainly. We can argue over exactly when will be the day when we're full. We are going to be full ahead of HS2. I think everybody should be able to agree on that one, undoubtedly.
And Tony and Arthur are absolutely spot on, and there's no doubt that the history of the East Coast has demonstrated that operators challenging Network Rail hard creates the cheapest extra capacity of all through effective timetabling solutions. But don't rule it out. There's more market out there, there's more demand, there are more services that could run. The East and the West Coast will be full.
Thank you very much. I have to apologise to everyone who hasn't been able to ask a question, but because we're over our allotted time. I'd like to thank the Conservative Transport Group and Virgin Trains for supporting this event. But above all, I'd like to thank our speakers who have been brilliant. Many thanks indeed.
Thank you.